For a brief moment, Bumpy Johnson and Malcolm X exchanged a glance amid the throng of people. No exchange of words, no gestures, just a profound mutual comprehension between the two. The date was February 21st, 1965, inside the Audubon Ballroom. Thomas Hagen rose to his feet, pulling a shotgun from beneath his jacket. The 400 attendees remained oblivious to the impending chaos. Yet Bumpy sensed it. He stood merely 10 feet from Hagen, pistol already gripped tightly, his finger poised on the trigger. A single shot, and the would-be killer would drop. Malcolm would survive. That's the instant when Malcolm pivoted, spotted Bumpy, noticed the weapon, and recognized the decision hanging in the balance. With a subtle shake of his head, Malcolm offered a faint smile. Bumpy's gaze shifted downward to the young girl positioned between them, clad in a brown dress with pigtails, perhaps no older than 6. She had wandered from her father's knee, scrambling onto a seat, and peering into the pathway, right in the path of the impending shot. Firing at that moment would send the bullet piercing through her first, long before striking on Hagen. As Bumpy lifted his eyes again, Malcolm silently formed those 3 words. I die standing. Moments later, the shotgun's roar reverberated across the hall. On that day, Bumpy Johnson couldn't preserve Malcolm X's life, but his actions over the following 15 seconds ensured the assassin wouldn't slip away. To grasp what unfolded that Sunday, one must first comprehend the vow Bumpy had given just 3 days prior. It was February 14th, 1965, Valentine's Day, at 2:46 a.m. Malcolm X's residence in Queens erupted in fire. Molotov cocktails hurled through the bedroom window. His spouse Betty and their 4 daughters, the eldest only 6, narrowly fled with their lives intact. The children huddled on the icy street in their pajamas, weeping and smudged with ash as flames consumed their home. Malcolm pinpointed the culprits, the Nation of Islam, enforcers loyal to Elijah Muhammad, the very allies he had once relied on utterly. They sought his demise for defecting, for revealing Elijah's scandals, for voicing honesty where compliance was demanded. The next morning, after the blaze, Bumpy Johnson arrived unexpectedly at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. No prior notice, no gifts. He simply appeared at first light, dressed in his crisp suit and hat. He located Malcolm in the lounge area as physicians examined his girls for effects of the smoke. Bumpy took a seat next to him, skipped any greetings, cut straight to it. Give me 48 hours. Those responsible won't make it to Wednesday. Malcolm fixed his eyes on the ground, worn out and shaken. When he responded at last, his tone held steady resolve, laced with sorrow. If I allow that, I'll embody every accusation they level against me. A fraud, shielded by a mobster's firepower. You'd keep breathing. I'd be hollow within. Malcolm met his gaze directly. For a decade, I've taught that aggression only fuels more aggression. I won't forsake it just because fear grips me. Bumpy clenched his jaw. This isn't about ideals, Malcolm. It's your family, your children at stake. They nearly perished in those flames yesterday. I realize, Malcolm replied, his voice faltering just a bit. But permitting you to act on my behalf would shatter all I've achieved. Retaliation begets retaliation. Vengeance demands more blood. That's the pattern I'm determined to end. Bumpy valued that stance, despised it, yet honored it. Fine, then let me guard you, nonstop. My top guys, weapons ready, always vigilant. Malcolm declined with a shake of his head. You're marked for death, Malcolm. You realize it. Perhaps, Malcolm said, reaching out his hand. but I'll go out untainted. I'll go out on my feet. Bumpy clasped it firmly, lingering briefly. They won't evade justice. I understand, Malcolm murmured softly, but hold back for my sake. I've accepted my fate. Pausing at the exit, Bumpy turned. 3 days, Malcolm. That's your window to reconsider. Malcolm merely grinned. I won't. Come Saturday night. Bumpy's telephone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. The caller was a 19-year-old busboy called Jerome, pulling the late shift at a coffee shop along Malcolm X Boulevard. Jerome had been raised just 3 streets from Bumpy's place, and like so many Harlem youths, he instinctively knew whom to alert when unease stirred. Mr. Johnson. Jerome's words trembled. A trio of guys just departed my spot. Back corner table. They discussed settling the issue with the minister. They referenced tomorrow, brought up Audubon, talked about shotguns. Bumpy bolted upright in bed. Any names? One of them. They referred to him as Hagen. Thomas Hagen. Bumpy shut his eyes. That rang a bell. A Nation of Islam hitman. Ruthless, methodical, a fanatic who viewed murder as sacred duty. You handled it well, Jerome. Exceptionally so. Now erase it from your mind. Once the call ended, Bumpy dialed Malcolm repeatedly. No response. He dispatched messages via every channel available. Silence returned. Thus, on Sunday, February 21st, Bumpy Johnson defied his principles. He proceeded solo. By 2:15 p.m., the Audubon Ballroom brimmed with arrivals. 400 souls, families, scholars, elderly ladies, who'd crossed paths with Malcolm back in his hustling days. Ambitious youths who viewed him as the herald of a transformed nation. Bumpy entered in his standard somber attire. No ostentation. Bumpy wielded authority through quiet presence. Rather than lingering at the rear, he wove through the assembly, stationing himself by a column on the left flank, 5th row in. Optimal vantage, near enough to intervene, several doorways in clear view. Survival instincts, Bumpy. Johnson never rested. He surveyed the crowd. Many faces were familiar ones. Folks from Malcolm's circle. Decent souls. Yet 3 stood out as strangers. In the front area, separated by 2 rows, a pair sat motionless, ignoring the initial speakers, simply biding their time. The figure in the middle of row 3 was Thomas Hagen. Bumpy spotted the vacant stare in his gaze, the rigid poise of someone resolved to take a life. Bumpy's fingers slipped beneath his coat, sensing the heft of his .38 revolver. He could stride down that brief walkway immediately. A pair of swift blasts, Hagen and his companion, gone before they crumpled. But with 400 onlookers present, chaos would ensue. Frenzy, a rush of bodies, bystanders trampled, and Malcolm would meet his end the next day anyhow. You couldn't halt zealots by eliminating a single one. They formed a plague. The cure demanded excising the entire blight. Thus Bumpy remained beside the column, observing, holding steady. 2:40 p.m. The host's announcement echoed across the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, allow me to introduce Malcolm X. The 400 attendees rose, clapping enthusiastically. Malcolm stepped to the platform in a plain black suit. No guards, no protectors, just an individual and his ideals. He lifted his arms to signal silence. The cheers subsided. Seats filled once more. Assalamu alaikum, Malcolm uttered. Wa alaikum assalam, the audience echoed back. Bumpy's focus stayed locked on Hagen. He noted the assassin's subtle forward tilt, the motion of his palm delving into his jacket. Then pandemonium erupted. A voice from the central rows yelled out, "Keep your hand out of my pocket. What's the matter with you?" A textbook diversion. Draw all eyes away. Sow disorder. Precisely then, the attacker's action unfolded. Thomas Hagen rose to his feet. His jacket parted. The shortened shotgun emerged, short range, savage, built for devastation. Bumpy's .38 was already drawn, halfway free from its holster, index finger poised on the trigger. 10 feet away, a straightforward target. The line of fire was unobstructed, but then Bumpy noticed her, the young child with white bows in her braids. Amid the uproar, she'd clambered onto her seat, twisting around to peer at the disturbance in back. She positioned herself right in the path between Bumpy and Hagen. A shot from Bumpy at that slant would inevitably strike her. Bumpy's teeth ground together. He shifted leftward to gain a clear view, only to find his path obstructed by rising figures. To the right, identical issue. At that instant, Malcolm pivoted, not facing Hagen, but Bumpy, as though he'd anticipated Bumpy's presence from the start. For an eternity spanning mere seconds, their gazes connected. In that suspended instant, Malcolm grasped it all. He spotted the weapon gripped in Bumpy's fist. He perceived the anguish etched on his ally's features, the grim assessment, the cruel arithmetic of bloodshed. He took in the child caught in their midst, pure and unaware, edging into the walkway in her simple brown church outfit. Malcolm realized Bumpy might squeeze that trigger, understood the round would rip through the innocent before striking on Hagen, recognized the unspoken plea Bumpy directed his way, a query no one ought to confront. Does your existence outweigh hers? For a decade, Malcolm had proclaimed that no single life held greater worth, that the young were inviolable, that aggression, cloaked as righteousness, remained aggression, that methods weighed equally with outcomes. Now he needed to embody it, not through rhetoric or oratory, but through decision. Thus Malcolm offered Bumpy the sole reply befitting a man of conviction. He nodded his head gently, with purpose. Then he offered a grin, not terror, not alarm, but resignation, and silently formed 3 words, "I die standing." Bumpy's digit halted on the trigger. The individual ahead of Bumpy lurched abruptly, fully obscuring the scene. Bumpy pushed ahead, straining for a glimpse. Boom! The shotgun's roar shattered the air. When Bumpy's vision cleared, Malcolm reeled rearward, crimson blooming over his torso. He fought to remain upright, struggled to hold firm, yet 2 additional assailants surged onto the platform, guns blazing repeatedly. 16 rounds struck Malcolm X. He collapsed, and Bumpy Johnson, the enforcer who'd neutralized Dutch Schultz, who'd confronted the Italian syndicate, who'd taken lives without pause for 30 years, remained rooted, pistol clutched, powerless to shield the sole person who truly counted. The venue exploded into turmoil, with shrieks and sobs filling the space, attendees ducking beneath seats, parents shielding their young. Thomas Hagen wheeled around and bolted toward the doorway, his shotgun clutched tight, fumes curling from its muzzle. A fierce resolve ignited within Bumpy. Not a fiery burst, but an icy resolve, a deadly calm. He advanced swiftly, fluidly, like a hunter on the prowl. Firing his piece wasn't viable. Far too many bodies in the line. Disorder reigned. 1 errant bullet, and bystanders would perish in the fray. Instead, Bumpy pursued, narrowing the gap. 15 feet. 10. 5. Hagen neared the escape hatch, hand extending for the latch. Mere 30 seconds from escape. Bumpy dove low, extended his leg, snared Hagen's foot with flawless accuracy. Hagen's drive propelled him onward, but his legs betrayed him, yanking rearward. He slammed, forehead first, onto the gleaming ballroom tiles. The shotgun escaped his grasp, skidding wildly over the surface. Bumpy delivered a sharp boot, propelling it beneath a cluster of toppled seats out of reach. Hagen clambered upright on his knees, eyes wild, fumbling for the revolver. An Bumpy seized Hagen's wrist and wrenched it sharply. The tiny pistol tumbled across the floor. What followed from Bumpy was entirely unforeseen. He refrained from shooting Hagen. He held back from thrashing him. He even kept his own weapon holstered. Bumpy had a compelling motive for holding fire. It had nothing to do with pity. Pity was never in the equation. Pulling the trigger would leave him as the sole suspect, holding a hot barrel, when officers stormed in. That would transform a heroic sacrifice into a mere underworld skirmish. Bumpy refused to tarnish Malcolm's enduring influence that way. Above all, corpses can't spill secrets. Hagen had to speak up. He had to reveal the architect of the plot, the financial backers, the approving authorities, and crucially, the fact that this individual had stolen Malcolm from his community. So, Bumpy intended to return him to that very community. He clutched Hagen's shirt front, hoisted him partially off the ground, and then hurled him into the throng pressing forward. 24 figures surged ahead. They had just witnessed Malcolm X's assassination, seen him collapse, and now the perpetrator stood exposed before them. A punch slammed into Hagen's face, followed by a second, then a barrage of grips and blows from half a dozen more. Bumpy retreated a step. Allow them their moment. Let them enforce the retribution the legal system denied. He bent toward the furious group, his words hushed, yet resonant. Keep him from gasping for air. Prevent any escape. Force him to confront his crime. The assembly grasped the intent. They forced Hagen flat against the ground, restraining him as if he were a feral beast. Sirens howled in the distance. Drawing nearer, Bumpy Johnson strode steadily to the lateral doorway. Amid the turmoil, the sobs, the lingering haze of gunpowder, when authorities poured in from the main entrance, Bumpy was already several streets distant, melting into Harlem's alleys as if he'd vanished entirely. In his wake, Thomas Hagen lay sprawled, bloodied and battered, yet breathing to face judgment in court, breathing to waste away behind bars, breathing to endure every remaining day haunted by his defeat, realizing Malcolm X perished unbowed, knowing Harlem's memory endures eternally. Osaram Malcolm X was declared deceased at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital at 3:30 p.m., 16 bullet injuries, 39 years of age, extinguished. Bumpy avoided the medical center. He dared not approach. Far too many lawmen, far too many inquiries, far too much scrutiny. Rather, he headed to a site untouched in ages. St. Philip's Church, modest and serene, deserted that Sunday dusk. He settled into the rearmost bench, solitary, his jacket still marked with crimson flecks. Malcolm's blood. The elderly cleric, Father Callahan, discovered him there after 60 minutes. "You seldom visit," the priest murmured gently. "True, but here you are, regardless." Bumpy offered no reply, his gaze fixed on the crucifix over the sanctuary. The hush, the void around him. I stood merely 10 paces back. Bumpy murmured at last, his tone scarcely audible. My firearm was drawn. I might have intervened, yet a young child, just 6, stood directly in the path of the shots. Father Callahan took a seat in the row ahead, pivoting to regard Bumpy. "Thus, you prioritize the innocent's safety above Malcolm's?" Malcolm made that call. Bumpy's words faltered. He locked eyes with me, spotted my pistol, and signaled no with a shake, urging me to stand aside. Then you granted his final wish. I delivered his end. Bumpy's fingers tightened into knots. I might have shifted position, sought a clearer vantage, taken some action. But paralyses gripped me as I observed his passing. The cleric paused in profound stillness. Malcolm X devoted his whole existence to readying himself for death in defense of his convictions. You preserved that for him. You respected it. Respecting it won't restore him. No. Yet Malcolm understood his path. He selected honor above mere endurance. He opted to perish upright instead of kneeling through existence. Few possess such resolve. Bumpy rose, fastening his coat to conceal the stains. Hagen survived. The mob assaulted him, but he'll endure to face prosecution. And the rest? Bumpy's features hardened. 3 gunmen were involved. Hagen's detained. The pair fled. Can they slip away? Never. Bumpy's tone turned glacial. They won't, Father Callahan comprehended fully. Retribution can't mend the scar. Perhaps not. Bumpy pivoted toward the exit. Still, it's the sole offering I can provide him now. Malcolm X's memorial service occurred on February 27th at Faith Temple Church of God in Christ. 3,000 filled the interior. Countless others crowded Harlem's thoroughfares. Bumpy Johnson lingered at the rear, not among the notables, not beside kin, merely pressed to the wall, observing. Betty Shabazz, Malcolm's spouse, noticed him. Their gazes connected over the packed sanctuary. She inclined her head subtly, mournfully, in recognition. She understood. She recognized Bumpy's presence at the scene. She acknowledged his efforts. She knew Thomas Hagen was secured because Bumpy ensured no flight. Following the ceremony, Bumpy proceeded unaccompanied to Ferncliff Cemetery, Malcolm's resting place. He positioned himself at the grave's rim, peering into the void at the coffin below. From his pocket, he withdrew a modest item, his straight-edge blade, the tool he'd borne for 3 decades, the one that prompted Harlem locals to veer aside at his approach, the emblem of his authority, his resilience, his principles. He laid it tenderly atop the casket. "You passed unyielding," Bumpy whispered softly, "precisely as you'd envisioned. But those who took you down, they'll meet their end in fear. That's the vow I made." Bumpy Johnson honored it completely. Just half a year later, the remaining pair of gunmen, the ones who slipped away during the chaos, got located, not by cops or the authorities, but through Harlem's own channels, Bumpy's connections. No courtroom for them. They simply vanished. Official records skip over those details. The books claim Thomas Hagen got sent to prison, while the other 2 dodged punishment. But chat with any Harlem resident from 1965, and you'll hear the real tale. Bumpy passed in 1968, 3 years post-Malcolm. A heart attack struck him at Wells Restaurant up in Harlem. Nothing dramatic, no gunfire or brawl, just the body of a seasoned fighter finally calling it quits. During his wake, a voice posed the question to one of Bumpy's longest-time allies. What stood out as Bumpy's finest hour? The guy paused deeply, then replied, "It was February 21st, 1965. Right there, in that crowded hall, pistol ready." Yet he backed Malcolm's decision despite the agony it caused him. That's the day Bumpy showed he transcended being a mere criminal. He embodied true integrity. Bumpy had taken lives for cash, influence, status, or just to stay alive. Yet that fateful Sunday, he opted against firing. He elected to respect a comrade's final request. He allowed Malcolm X to meet his fate upright, with pride, and on his own conditions. The textbooks overlook this, but they shouldn't, since the toughest act for an armed man might be holding back the shot. The boldest move for a hitman could be stepping aside to let death come naturally. Malcolm X fell while still on his feet, and Bumpy Johnson ensured history captured that image. If this account of loyalty, self-denial, and gut-wrenching decisions resonates, go ahead and subscribe. Give it a thumbs up. Pass it along to a friend who could use a lesson on genuine toughness. Leave your thoughts below. Would you have fired and turned on alerts for more hidden gems from the gritty corners that shaped